Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Something Interesting. I'm your old pal, John the Storyteller. I tell strange but true things from history, unusual people, unusual events, sometimes tragedies, sometimes, as in this case, tendrils that lead to probably something you've had within the last, well, if you're me, within the last hour, but most people within the last day or two. I'm going to begin at the beginning. This story doesn't necessarily have a twist ending, but it is interesting the way that things kind of come together historically. Great people kind of stand on the back of other great people, improve on inventions and things like that. In this case, we're improving on something that was a discovery by a truly great man named Joseph Priestley. Joseph Priestley was an Englishman who, I'm from the South, but I spent very formidable years in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. Kind of grew up in Pennsylvania, you might even say, and one of the trips that my parents, who were extremely educated people and really wanted us to be worldly and take us places, and I mean I can't even begin to tell you the number of places that I've been, just simply for the purpose of fun education, museums and things like that. And one of the places that my parents took me as a child was the Joseph Priestley House in Northumberland, Pennsylvania, and my dad kind of remembers me being a jackass the whole time and not learning a thing, but unbeknownst to him, it stuck. So I do remember going to the Joseph Priestley House, and I do remember seeing his instruments and things there at that house, instruments that were used previously whenever he was in England to make a number of startling discoveries. Joseph Priestley discovered oxygen. He did work with airs, he called them airs, and one of the airs that he discovered was oxygen. And even further than that, he discovered that plants produce oxygen. He put a mint plant in a bottle with a burning candle, and realized that this mint plant was producing oxygen that would feed the candle, that the candle needs to burn. He did work with electricity, advancements there. He obviously didn't discover electricity, but he did advancements in electricity. He had some odd ideas. I guess maybe starting back with the fact that his family, I shouldn't say odd, I should say kind of countercultural ideas, and particularly counter-religious ideas. He's from England. He only spent the last 10 years of his life in Northumberland, Pennsylvania. But Joseph Priestley was born of a family of dissenters, meaning that they were not part of the Church of England at the time, and of course not being part of the main, ruling class. This is late 1700s, by the way. The main ruling class, or the main church was kind of a way of getting yourself ostracized. And so through his life, he kind of experienced this, and whenever he found out about a guy, he's, contrary to popular belief, he's not a founder of this actual Protestant branch, but he did found the U.S. Incarnation of it, and that is the Unitarian Church. And now they're called Unitarian Universalists. It's two different churches that came together. But the idea behind the Unitarian Church is that they are tolerant of religious dissension. I don't know if you've ever been to a Unitarian thing, but it's kind of, it's different than, say, if you grew up, it's very different than if you grew up in, say, a Baptist church or something like that. It's very, oh boy, like very tolerant, very, not too much in your face with God or anything like that. And that's kind of the way Priestley thought. But whenever he came to the United States, he did found the Unitarian Church of Philadelphia. So he did start Unitarianism in the United States, and Unitarianism is was and is a branch of I guess Protestantism, you would call it. That is, maybe I should do a something interesting on this. Maybe I'll research it and find out a little bit about it. But that's not the reason that we that we are celebrating him today on something interesting. We are celebrating him today on something interesting because of a very specific invention that he made. By the way, he discovered oxygen in 1774, but it was actually known prior to that because in 1767, Joseph Priestley invented soda. And so that's what I'm talking about, that you have probably had within the last day, and if you're me, you probably had it in the last hour. Soda, aka liquid heroin. But he basically invented carbonated water. He worked with gases and things like that. Local brewery kept him supplied with a gaseous form of carbon dioxide from their brewing process all the time. And he he wasn't really looking to do this, but he is the first person to be able to add CO2, carbon dioxide, to water and have it drinkable. So we credit Joseph Priestley with the invention of soda. Now, like I said, whenever people do great things, other people tend to improve on that. So he invented soda water, or he invented carbonated water, and didn't do a lot with it. He didn't market it. That was not his thing. He was not out to make money. He was a true scientist in the sense that he just wanted to learn. And so, here's another interesting little factoid about Joseph Priestley. Due to an illness, he got a permanent stutter. So you can actually add Joseph Priestley to the list of people like James Earl Jones and, I know, the greatest voice in Hollywood, stutterer, you bet. You can add Joseph Priestley to the list of people who were able to overcome adversity, particularly in the form of speech impediments and things like that, which is one reason he did not want to become a preacher, because he just couldn't stand up there and preach. People just wouldn't listen. They lost it after a while. However, whenever he moved to Pennsylvania, he got caught up in this idea of having the Pennsylvania countryside, this Northumberland, Pennsylvania countryside. It's funny, the Joseph Priestley house now is like in a series of roads. It's almost in like a downtown area, but that was absolutely the opposite of what it was whenever Joseph Priestley came there in 1774. He came to Pennsylvania in 1774. And by the way, he died 10 years later in 1804 at age 70. A little bit in ill health, kind of in portions of his life. But yeah, so he only had 10 more years once he moved to Pennsylvania. But anyway, whenever he moved to Pennsylvania, he kind of got caught up in this wild idea of this utopia, along with his sons, who were only into it for a little while. They bought a lot of property and wanted to start this utopia. He had always been, there was even like Priestley riots that finally convinced him to leave England because he was such a dissenter of the church. It was kind of religious-based riots that convinced him to leave England. So the Priestley riots kicked him out of there, and he kind of came over and was like, I don't want to get involved in this mess anymore. I don't want to be involved in politics and religion and all these things. So I'm going to start a utopian community, and we want immigrants to come and be part of this utopia and live here with us. And, you can buy 40-acre tracts or 400-acre tracts or whatever of land, and we're all going to live together in peace and harmony. And oddly enough, it failed because immigrants could not afford to get to Northumberland, Pennsylvania. I mean, it was really in the idyllic farmland, in the fact that you could not get to Northumberland, Pennsylvania. Now, I am looking at my timer, and so it's 10 minutes now, so I might possibly cut this off and make this a two-parter, unless you can sit still for 20 minutes. I'll tell you what, I'm underestimating you guys. Sit still for 20 minutes. I'm going to run this thing right to the end. How about that? Let's just do this thing. Let's know about the history of soda. Let's sit down and learn. You can watch 20 minutes of Stranger Things. You can watch 20 minutes of Simpsons. So you can listen to me for 20 minutes and find out why you love the soda that you drink so much and why it has become our go-to beverage for almost any social occasion, outings, and things like that. Now, anyway, the 1767 is our carbonated water. I think 1793 they started using the term soda water, and soda water was available, in various places, usually bigger cities that you could get hold of it. But in 1835 they started bottling soda water in the old style bottles, and so those were usually hand blown bottles. I'm going to talk a little bit about glass making techniques in this too. You see the tendrils that go all over the place. There's a couple little interesting and fun facts about glass making. That was 1835. In 1851, the Irish invented ginger ale. And so they took this carbonated water and infused it with a kind of a boiled mixture. They make what's called a wort. And there's a process that it goes through to use the ginger plant to make ginger ale. And then in 1876, now here's where we start seeing major progress in sodas, and interestingly enough, you will recognize all the earliest sodas because they're still around. I mean, they are in your local Circle K, available for your purchase. By the way, a lot of people think that Coke is the first soda. You are wrong. It is not the first soda. I'll tell you what, why don't I give you a little timeline of the first sodas. Schweppes is the first soda, if you want to call it a soda. That came out in 1783. 1866 was Vernors. I didn't realize that, because Vernors to me, I mean, I didn't grow up with Vernors. It kind of like appeared later on. So I'm like, okay, well, Vernors is a new soda. Oh no, it's the second oldest soda soda brand that there is. 1876 was Moxie, and 1885 was not Coke, but Dr. Pepper. Dr. Pepper is one full year older than Coke that came about in 1886. We also give 1898. I have skipped over a few between Coke and Pepsi, but we also give 1898 as a date for the mass marketing of Pepsi. I'll talk a little bit more about Pepsi in just a minute. One of the things is, one of the reasons that Pepsi is so important to me, even though I don't know, Pepsi or Coke, give me either one, is that Pepsi was invented in North Carolina, New Bern, North Carolina. And there's another great drink that was invented much later in North Carolina. And by the way, they're not paying me. I mean, unless they want to. You can send me a check if you want to, Cheerwine. But Cheerwine was invented in 1917 in Salisbury, North Carolina. Sorry, it took me a minute. Salisbury, North Carolina. So you have two towns in North Carolina very close together that have major impact, particularly Pepsi, obviously, that have had major impact on the soda industry. Now, Cheerwine was something that I got as a kid. My grandparents would, have it for me, and it was a real kind of special thing because where we lived in Pennsylvania, it wasn't available. It's still not available. My sister still lives in Pennsylvania, and it's still not available up there. Whenever I go and visit her, I have to smuggle her some Cheerwine. So don't check my trunk if I'm going down 95 because it's probably full of Cheerwine. But actually, I don't think that's illegal. But anyway, we'll talk about Pepsi in a few moments. Anyway, so 1876, we're talking about early stuff here. We've had Vernors, we've had Moxie. Now we have a gentleman named Charles Elmer Hyers, who uses sassafras roots in the same way that they use ginger roots to make root beer. Now, Charles Hyers was a teetotaler, not into alcohol at all, and did not want to call it root beer, even though it's made in kind of, with the wort, and, it's made like a beer. He wanted to call it root tea. But he also wanted to sell it to Pennsylvania coal miners, who were more likely to buy it, in his mind, if it was called root beer. So Charles Elmer Hyers, which, by the way, Hyers Root Beer is still around, in 1876, well, I say he invented, but we'll talk about this in a minute, brought root beer to the forefront. Now, at the same time, in 1898, there was another type of root beer. It's a little bit different, and this root beer is still around too. If you want to set all these up, that used sassafras roots rather than like sarsaparilla. Have you ever had sarsaparilla? It's hard to find it anymore, but sarsaparilla uses sassafras roots flavoring and things like that. This root beer was called Barks, and Barks is still around too, but their formula was different than Hyers. Also, A&W Root Beer came out in 1919, and IBC Root Beer came out about the same time. They no longer use sassafras or sarsaparilla roots because of something called safrole, which was outlawed as being a potential cancer causer. So now all root beer is simply flavored. It's not made with roots in the same fashion that it is. But if you happen to have a sassafras tree around, or a sarsaparilla bush or whatever it is, you can take the roots off of it and boil it in water, and you will have a tasty beverage. I used to, as a personal aside, I used to work in a very rural area of North Carolina. The far eastern upper part of North Carolina is still very rural and poor, for that matter. But I went into a house one time. I did housing rehabilitation, and I went to a house one time, and this lady was had dirty roots that she was throwing in a pot. And I was like, "What are you doing?" And she's like, "I'm making a root beer type drink." And I said, "This is an opportunity. Let me have some of that drink." So I sat around while she made it, and she gave me some of the drink in it, and I could taste it didn't taste like root beer, but I could taste where it was coming from. So anyway, the roots are what give the root beer the delicious flavor that we're all used to. So anyway, 1893, a fellow by the name of, I actually did research for this one, a fellow by the name of Caleb, I think it's Caleb Bradford. Let me make sure I got that right. Oh my goodness, I have goofed up my thing, but anyway, Caleb. In fact, I know that's right. Caleb Bradham. Caleb Bradham in Salisbury, North Carolina, had a soda fountain, which, interestingly enough, is still there. You could go to. I'm sorry, in New Bern, North Carolina, Caleb Bradford's soda fountain is still there. It's a Pepsi museum now, a small museum because it was a small soda fountain, but the building and everything is still there. You can go visit it. But Caleb had something that he was marketing called Brad's Drink, and it was very popular. But in 1898, whenever it started getting a little bit more, or he wanted to have it bottled and have a little more national distribution, he changed the name to Pepsi. And some people have said that's because of like Pepsid acid or Pepsin, things like that. But it's a little bit of a dubious claim because what was it? He bought the rights to a defunct a soda manufacturer that had come out, in the same time, called Pep Cola. So Pep Cola came out about the time of Coca-Cola and didn't make it. Caleb Bradford bought the rights and then started advertising as Pepsi. So Pep Cola didn't make it, but anyway, did well for a while. Did you know also that Pepsi, as popular as it was, Caleb Bradford was not that great of a businessman. There was sugar prices and things that varied when you're talking about a large operation that he kind of didn't count on. And did you know that Pepsi went bankrupt in 1923? Pepsi was done in 1923. It was purchased in 1931 by a candy company. And this candy company tried to sell Pepsi to Coca-Cola Company in 1931. And Coke said, not interested. So they really should have bought it. That was one of those things. It's like, because now you have one main one main competitor to Pepsi. I mean to Coke, and that of course is Pepsi. Let me switch over to Coke here for a minute. Coca-Cola and cocaine. Everybody has said that Coca-Cola originally contained cocaine. True or false? The answer is true. It did contain cocaine. But the thing that most people get confused about is, when did they remove the cocaine from Coca-Cola? An answer that I get a lot of times is 1903. And that is correct. In the sense that in 1903 they attempted to remove the what is it called? The alkaloid that makes cocaine from cocoa, which, by the way, is still in Coca-Cola to this day. Coca-Cola has a company that receives this cocoa and removes the alkaloid that creates cocaine from it, and if they get, I mean, $200 million worth of cocaine could be made from these plants that Coca-Cola Company gets in a year. By the way, that's a facility that's guarded, almost like the Coca-Cola secret. But that is so that's still part of cocaine. Now, Coca-Cola. Now, the answer is true. In 1903, they started attempting to take the cocaine out of Coca-Cola. They upped the sugar and they upped the caffeine. But it wasn't until 1929 that they perfected the process. So there were still traces of cocaine in Coca-Cola until 1929. So it wasn't quite as early as we thought. A lot of people said, "Oh yeah, they only did it for a few years till 1903." They was like, "No more cocaine. This is they realized it was a bad thing." By the way, cocaine was not outlawed until 1914. So Coca-Cola was doing nothing that was against the law. In fact, they were 11 years ahead of the law by getting rid of this cocaine early on. It's almost like people knew the dangers. People knew the dangers of things. I remember reading a Sherlock Holmes, and Watson was giving Sherlock Holmes a hard time about smoking and its health effects. And the Sherlock Holmes were written just before and just after the turn of the century. We're talking about 1898. Watson was telling Holmes that he needs to not smoke so much because it's bad for him. We knew these things a long time ago. We knew cocaine was bad for us a long time ago. But it takes a while before things kind of catch up. And so in 1914, they finally caught up and said, well, we need to stop getting people. We need to stop getting people high. By the way, Coca-Cola is not the only soft drink that has had addictive properties, or that has had, I should say, that has had bad things in them. 7-Up had lithium in it for a while. Lithium, like you would put in a battery, was in 7-Up. So, wow. Anyway, I appreciate you guys sticking with me this long. I'm at 25 minutes now, and I believe I'm going to have to make this a two-parter because I have several other tendrils to the history of soda that I'd like to go into, and I'd like to do that and not cheat you guys out of the information that I would like to give to you. So I apologize, but I'm going to make this a two-parter, and hopefully you were interested enough in this part that you will watch part 2 of the history of soda right here on Something Interesting.